Disclaimer. Judge Ron Rangel is providing this podcast and website for educational purposes only, as well as to give the public general information regarding topics related to the criminal justice system. The views, thoughts, and opinions of his guest speakers are the speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Judge Rangel. All rise. You are now listening to Beyond the Gavel with Judge Ron Rangel, educating the public and expanding mindsets. Subscribe on our website, beyondthegavelpodcast.com, or your favorite podcast platform for more of the latest podcast episodes and updates.
Welcome to Beyond the Gavel with Judge Ron Rangel. I'm your host. Thank you so much for listening. You know, this is where we break down the legal world from the inside and out. And as your host, I'm always excited to come to you and talk to you about whatever topic it is. Been a little bit of a while since we've actually had a recording. Just so you know, there's been a lot going on. Apart from Fiesta, apart from teaching, apart from all the other stuff that is required of my time, we're back. And so as a result of all that kind of stuff, I'm excited to have today's conversation. In the studio, we have Erica Hernandez. Now, Erica is an Emmy Award-winning journalist with 15 years of experience in the broadcast news business. She's a proud graduate of the School of Journalism at Texas State University, and she began her reporting career in Laredo, Texas, covering courts in Webb County. After a stint as a producer in Austin, she returned to her hometown and landed at KSAT 12, the very station that she grew up watching. Now, she serves as KSAT 12's lead courthouse reporter, covering criminal trials, the justice system, various high-profile cases, and all sorts of other good stuff here at the courthouse. She's also the co-host of KSAT's popular podcast entitled Texas Crime Stories. Welcome, Erica.
Thanks for having me. This is exciting.
I appreciate you being here. I know that you and I had a very brief communication earlier, and we talked about you being interviewed today.
Yeah, the roles are flipped. So I was like, this is different for me. I'm usually interviewing you for something. So being here today, being interviewed is a little different.
It's a nice experience. It's a nice experience. We're going to make it nice and chill, nice and relaxed. We're going to educate the communities of what you do. How would you describe it? How would you describe what Erica Hernandez does for KSAT 12 and for the community?
A lot of organization and educating. I know a big part of what I do is tell our viewers, what's going on here at the courthouse and explaining it to them in words they can understand. Because when you come into a courtroom, there's a lot of legal words that are thrown around. Sometimes for myself, I'm like, hello, can somebody explain this to me? So I could explain it to our viewers because it could be very daunting. And I've noticed a lot of times when I've come into the courthouse and people are walking around, they look lost. They don't understand what the process is. So I try my best to break it down for them in a way that they can understand and not be so scared of.
It's a different world, right?
It's definitely a different world. And there's still things I'm learning, even though I've covered it, years ago in Webb County and now covering it here in Bexar County, where it's a completely different beast. There's so many different courts and different levels of courtrooms. So I'm still learning every day new things. And sometimes I'll even ask you or other judges or attorneys, like, what does that mean or what's going on? Because I feel like every day I'm learning.
And, you're a fixture here and you're part of the educational process. But in reality, I don't know any attorney or judge that is not constantly learning. Right? We're in this field that is so broad, so vast, and there's always something new that's coming up. We always have to ask each other, what do you think about that? What does this mean? What does that mean? Because we deal with nuances that are just incredible.
The broadcast world is a lot of the same. Ever since, the pandemic, COVID, everything has changed so much. Even for us, everything's live streamed, or I could just hop on a Zoom and do an interview now, where before we would have to travel to somebody to get that interview. And even here in the courthouse, how we've covered it has changed immensely from when I took over when Paul Venema retired to now. I mean, we're live streaming trials. I'm covering more than one case a day. I'm trying to keep up with it all. So I think it's also gotten a lot more fast paced for us in the broadcast world.
There's a lot of topics to distill right there. We got a great little roadmap. So let's first talk about how you grew up watching KSAT.
Oh, yeah.
So I first moved to San Antonio. I'm originally from Portland, Texas, on the coast. Shout out to all GP Wildcats, because I know that a lot of hometown folks are listening in, and I appreciate them for doing that. It's always good to remember your roots, right? I first moved here to go to St. Mary's undergrad when I was 20. I'm 57 now, so it's been almost 40 years, 37 plus years that I've been in San Antonio. And KSAT 12 was always the news channel for me to watch. And I grew up watching Paul Venema. And to finally become a lawyer and then to finally become the elected judge and got to work with Paul quite a bit. What was it experience for you to come in at a time when I'm sure you were also growing up, watching and admiring and learning from Paul Venema? What was it like for you to come in and basically took over his spot?
So I grew up in Wilson County, a little town called Poth. And, we didn't have a lot growing up, so we didn't have cable. So it was just your basic channel. So my parents watched every newscast. They watched the morning news, they watched the 5, they watched the 6 and the 10 o'clock. So I had to watch that. We didn't have any other TV on. And I would always see Jesse Degollado. I would see Paul Venema. And there was, on Ken's, Chris Maru. There were these giant fixtures in broadcast journalism for me. But we always just stuck with KSAT. And I think a lot of it had to do with Jessie because she was one of these first Latina women.
Yes.
That looked like us, that was on TV doing something that I kind of aspired at the time to do. When I started at KSAT 14 and a half years ago, it was crazy because I was sitting next to these individuals now as coworkers because they were still there, and became friends with them, got to learn about their families, and they were just everyday, they had big personalities, but they were like, I could chat with them about anything. They were so, it just brought everything into perspective that they were people too. They, you knew Paul.
Yeah.
Paul had a little quirky saying or a little quick-witted thing to say back to anybody about little things. He was a huge Willie Nelson fan, but he loved covering courts.
Yeah.
He loved coming here. So getting able to pick his brain about things, especially right before he retired, it was really special for me. And then he retired and he was just like, go get him, kid. That was basically it. And I was just like, okay.
Yeah, he was honored. He was honored to be in the profession.
He was so honored, and he never took it for granted. And he covered, gigantic cases all over the state, and not just, stories in a courthouse, but just big stories in general across the state. And he's just such a giant figure. And I hope I'm filling in those shoes for him because it was a little daunting to take over after him. He'd been here for 40 plus years covering this beat. And I was like, okay, I know how to do this, but I also wanted to make my own mark. I didn't want to copy Paul Venema because he was his own person. He was his own style, but I also wanted to do him proud.
Yeah. And when he retired, he actually told me, I said, I'm going to miss you, because he and I went through COVID together, the harshest parts of COVID.
Yeah.
There was a magistration issue that occurred a couple of years before COVID where I was basically thrust into the fold for pretty much every day of the week related to issue the judges were having with the county. And I told him, I just don't know how to handle, not seeing you all the time. And he mentioned you. He said, you're going to be all right. She's coming in. She's great. You're in good hands is basically what the courthouse.
That makes me feel special now. He was not the best at showing sometimes his real feelings. So I never knew he was just like, go get him, kid. That was back hug. See y'all later.
Yeah.
So that's really good to know. He was great to have. And then I sat next to Jessie Degollado in the newsroom.
Was she like a role model for you? She
really was. Mm-hmm. She really was. And she's become actually a really good friend now. Getting to now to the last few years of her career, we're deskmates. We sat next to each other. Right. So I was able to bounce ideas off of her. She was really big on empathy and when you interview somebody, be empathetic. Put yourself in their shoes. How would you feel? like just relate to them as best you can. And I think that come very much in handy, especially as we deal with a lot of families here in the courtroom who are going through their worst possible, times of their lives and going through these sometimes horrific trials. And it doesn't always feel good to go up to somebody and be like, hey, would you like to do an interview? Mm-hmm. So she's really taught me how to approach that in a more empathetic way and just seeing things in a different way. And she had a really good way of doing that. She got some of her best interviews because of that. And she retired last year, but we still go have lunch every once in a while, and I have a picture of me and her on my desk, and it's just great to see somebody that I grew up watching now become such a good friend and mentor.
Yes, words of wisdom. And that's kind of important in the profession, in any profession. We're just talking about judges and administrative roles with judges and things of that nature. You got to always find a good mentor.
Yeah.
It's somebody to learn from, and at the same time, you got to mentor others. Because that's how we grow and that's how we learn how to approach what we do and think about it and contemplate and self-reflect. All those things are important in the kind of work that we do, right?
Yeah, I see that a lot with our interns that come in and want to go spend the day with me here. It's really funny because they see stuff on TV. They see these court shows or they see these true crime shows, and they think it's over in a day. Uh-huh. And obviously there's trials that we've gone on for weeks.
Yeah.
I had one intern was like, oh, how did it turn out? Was it guilty or not guilty? I was like, that was just opening arguments. What? So having to teach them what that legal system is too. It's not what you see on TV all the time. It's really a lot slower. And I think a lot of the newer generation, having to get them to understand that. And those are the type of viewers we're trying to also get. We obviously have a demographic that goes toward a older audience, but we're really trying to make it interesting now where newer audience could watch. So, we're posting things on Instagram and on TikTok and Facebook. We're live streaming on YouTube, trials, and that's where we're gaining a lot of our traction, and it's real interesting. And I always tell, you and the other judges who have allowed me to do that live stream to thank you, because it's really opened our audience to a bigger audience.
Well, you were mentioning earlier how times have changed. Technology has really changed things. So back in the day when I was young, same idea, right? We only had the 3 major channels. We had 4 with PBS. We had the ABC, NBC, CBS. That's where we got all our news. Newscasters, news reporters, people that work in the studio that are working as anchors. We always looked at them as these are people that are filled with integrity. This is the only place we got our news, right? So once technology happened, then you got all these different types of cable channels and different mediums. We were talking about doing the Facebook Live, and we're talking about these other mediums that people use. How has that changed from the time that you basically first got involved in the news world? How has that technology changed what you do and how it affects your work?
So when I first started, just for KSAT example, 14 and a half years ago, we didn't have a digital team yet. We had a website, but we didn't have a digital team. And then Facebook kind of changed everything. Mm-hmm. And we had to grow a digital team. And I got to be a part of that first digital team and helping make up. So a lot of the things that we were creating was not only going for the website and social media, but it was also being created for on air. So we were kind of having to create the same story, but 2 different ways,
right?
Seen 2 different ways. So that kind of opened it up. And then it also changed in the fact that we lost viewers because people started cutting the cord, and people now watch all their news on either YouTube or Facebook, or that's where they get their news. And a lot of it obviously is it's hard. I mean, it gives us another challenge because we have to be creative in how we keep viewers coming back. Mm-hmm. So we constantly are having strategy meetings. We have multiple meetings throughout the day, editorial meetings. We have one at 9. We have another one in the afternoon with the afternoon crew. I mean, it's constantly conversation going on how we're going to present a story. And before, it used to be like, we're not going to break it until it goes on TV. Now it's digital first.
Right.
It doesn't matter if it, the noon or 5 or 6, we're going to put it on the website or on social media first. So if you make a ruling in court, I'm just going to put it out there. I'm not going to wait for the 5 or 6.
Right.
But now the 5 or 6 is where I get to actually sit there and explain the process. And even then, that part has gotten, how we do it is different. We're not, a traditional, what we call a package, is the news story that airs for the day. It would be me talking, there'd be a soundbite, me talking, another soundbite. We're even changing that formula up into what it looks like on air, adding graphics, adding text over video, really trying to keep the viewers, especially newer viewers, engaged.
So you really have to learn and adapt how to speak in technology type language, right? You have to learn how to.
I always say if another social media app comes out, I'm going to throw my phone out the window because they're like, oh, but update here and update here and update here. I have accounts all over the place. I'm like, I can't keep up. And as I'm getting older, I'm like, even more, it's getting harder. Like TikTok, I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
If you tell me to do a TikTok video, it's going to take me forever, but I could do an Instagram one a lot quicker for you.
Yes.
So I'm like, if you throw one more social media app at me, I'm just not going to download it.
There are politicians, judges in particular that, obviously that's my world, that's my field. They tend to put so much information as to what they're doing throughout their day. And I'm still having a hard time. I still choose not to put most of what I do on social media. And one of the things I'm learning is other people will put that stuff out there for me.
Yeah, and there's a balance because, we'll have consultants come in and kind of view our stuff and give us kind of an outside perspective on what we should be doing or not be doing. And the last kind of meeting I had with the consultant, they're like, oh, I love how you put a little bit about your family life and put a little bit, about the courts, but do it this way. And it's just, there's definitely a balance, and my husband's not one for the spotlight.
Uh-huh.
So he's like, please don't put photos of me up, or like, please don't do that. So I have to definitely find the back and forth on how much I do put out there, especially about my private life. And obviously I cover cases and I cover stuff with not so good people sometimes. So I obviously don't want to give too much away either.
And my wife, right before she passed, that was a big concern of hers. It's like, my life should not be out there for the public to consume and for other people to look at me and know who I am. And so it was that balance once, because I ran the first time in 07, 08 when Obama won. And that is when the whole field politically opened up. And then he started thinking, how much privacy am I going to have in this type of field? So I guess that applies to you too.
It applies. Yeah. And I have to have, like, even on my personal file, it's not my name as it is. Like I used to just put like my middle name first with another last name because people will find you. People will try to click. People will try to send you messages, and you'll be surprised. I'm okay with comments, good or bad. It doesn't bother me being in this business for so long. But it's when they start like attacking family or, attacking friends. And so there's definitely a balance you have to find. And but I do definitely every once in a while I'll post about my kids, especially I always brag about my daughter and, in her sports as she's, starting her softball career. But other than that, I keep it mostly about courts or what I'm doing at work.
Kind of humanizing you a little bit.
Yeah, I am a person. I do have a family. I do my other, I say my other job is going home and being a mom and a wife. And I always say sometimes coming to work is easier than putting the mom hat on. But, it's definitely a balance, and it's a good one, though. They keep me humble for sure.
Let's talk a little bit about the job that you have and the kind of work that you do day by day. So you come into the courtroom. You made reference to folks thinking that cases in the courthouse happen in a day.
Nope.
and we know, those of us that are in the courtroom and that work in the courtroom know that it's a very slow process. Sometimes you have days upon days of expert testimony related to some scientific information that would put most people to sleep, right? So what is it like for you to take that type of information and distill it? We're talking about Paul Venema earlier. I have this tendency when he would come in and do an interview with me, I have a tendency to sort of start with the underline. Let me explain how this works. And he would always say, Ron, give me the Sesame Street version, right? Give me the basic, explain it to somebody who's, doesn't have the information that you have. How do you do that in developing your news stories?
I come in, especially if there's a trial and it's one of those long trials, I know that I'm going to be sitting, and every day I want to make sure my story looks different.
And you work very long hours.
And I work sometimes very long
I've
hours.
Seen you in the courtroom very late.
I've been here very late, especially if we're live streaming a trial. I'm here from starts till the time it ends, which some days are longer than others. And there's a lot of information that's being thrown out, and and I have to condense that into a very short version of that.
You got to pay attention.
I have to pay attention. I'm
details.
Constantly writing notes. I've actually started writing on paper when I first took over, and quickly changed to an iPad and writing my notes because it was just quicker for me. I was able to see it all in kind of a bigger picture. And my photographer, Misael Gomez, I work with the same photographer every day, which is, I'm very lucky because not every reporter gets to do that.
Y'all are a team.
We're a team because he's worked with Paul, and so he understood what happens here. So we have a very good system on how to do things. Most times a reporter will go back in their day and just what we call log an interview with time codes to put their story together. I wouldn't have time to go back and listen to every piece of testimony that was said in the day. So I pick out the ones I like, and I do it by the time of the day. So if at 9:30 a.m. so-and-so said something, I put that in my notes, and he has his camera set up to the time of the day.
I got you. So you coordinate.
So we coordinate it. So, because sometimes the photographer will just hit play and whatever time code shows up that is, but he sets his to the time of the day. So I know where to go back later, and it's a quicker process. So that's kind of how we start the day. And then I literally pick out what was the most interesting part of this day, because that's all the viewer's going to want to know. If I get into the weeds, into the details, I'm going to lose them. So I just take literally the most emotional or the most interesting fact of the day, and I build my story around that. And that's basically it. And I write it, and I put a couple, sound hits from within. If there's a day where there's no good testimony and it's that, the forensic evidence and there's nothing I can pull, I will then explain, hey, this is where we are in this trial. Yes, it may seem like we've been going on forever, but this is part of what is happening. This is part of the investigation. I'll have graphics built of kind of what's happening next, what we could expect next, and just kind of leave it at that. I don't like to get people into the weeds and make it boring. So my goal is for, especially if I'm covering the same trial every day, to make sure it looks different every day.
So that's the courthouse reporting. That's what you do in the courtroom.
That's what I do in the courtroom.
Yes, you do more than that.
I do obviously do more than that. And when there is not a trial going on, or there's, where you guys are kind of on a lull and, on vacations and stuff, I go out and do other reporting, general assignments, whatever's kind of going on through the day. I've done a lot of criminal justice pieces on, what's going on just broader throughout the county with, police efforts or crime rates.
Investigative
to start. We've done a few of those.
Yeah.
I get to do fun things sometimes too, I get to go out and meet the community too, which is always fun. And not being in a setting where it's so tense.
So every day is different for you.
Every day is different. Yes. That's what I liked about the job. I can't sit still, and I can't do the same thing twice, and I have to be moving. So I think that was one of the big things why I liked doing this, because there was something different every day.
Is some of the things that you're talking about, and then sort of how we started in your communications with your the friendship that you've developed with Jesse DeGallardo. You talked about the communication skills being important, right? But you also talked about the empathy. It's very clear that to be successful at your job, you got to present some sort of confidence, right? You got to present some sort of friendliness, some sort of openness when people are watching you. People want to watch you.
Yeah, and I think they also want to know you're human. I found my best stories were when I didn't just put a camera in somebody's face. I went to them first. I called them, or I went up to them without cameraman. I introduced myself. I said, I'm sorry this is happening, or whatever's going on in your life. I'm so sorry. Here's my card. If you'd like to talk about it, we're here to talk to you. Obviously, if you're not ready, you're not ready. You don't have to tell me yes. It is okay if you tell me no. And that's kind of how I usually introduce myself for a story, especially those sensitive ones. Yeah. I always try to put myself in their shoes. If I'm going through the worst times in my life, I don't want a camera shoved in my face. Right. And not all journalists, work that way. Some people have different tactics, and that's fine. But for me, I want to be able to sleep at night knowing that I treated someone how I would want to be treated.
How difficult is it for you when you approach somebody and you need information for whatever it is that would be a story that the community should know about. How difficult is it for you to extract? Maybe I can imagine sometimes people want to block you from getting information. Sometimes folks just don't want to open up. What's that experience like in trying to get that information?
It's hard. Sometimes depending on the story, especially if, they don't want to give us information. I tried to find other avenues. I tried asking different ways. Or I'll be like, okay, well, maybe I'll try again tomorrow, kind of showing that I'm not going away, but, I'm still going to respect you, but I'm not going away.
That human aspect.
Yeah. Just kind of being like, okay, well, I'll get back to you later.
Yeah.
I don't want to leave a bad taste in anybody else. And I think that's just kind of how I was raised as well by my parents, just treat people with respect. And it's actually gotten me very far. I know, unfortunately, I was the first reporter on scene when Sutherland Springs happened.
Ooh, yeah.
And, my mom is an EMT in Wilson County at the time, so I was visiting family when we heard the scanners go off. So
that had to be tough.
It was hard and kind of in my own backyard of where I grew up. So, and then seeing kind of my mom there working and, being a first responder there, I learned very quickly that we got a lot of our stories because we were empathetic. And then I saw a lot of other media, especially national media, come in and just kind of stomp on people's yards and try to, put cameras and faces on. This was a horrible day. And it really taught me to just be really careful with people.
Right.
And their emotions, especially.
Let's say a situation like that comes out, and you got to come across people that are self-serving, people that maybe will give you, maybe not even purposefully, misinformation, but it could be based on their own biases, their own perceptions. What's it like to have to parcel that out?
I always fact check. I always kind of go back, and especially if they're, giving information out on something, I'll try to either fact check or get somebody else to either verify it for me or verify it myself.
You got a lot of sources.
I have a lot of sources. So, I call people, I call others. Hey, I heard this. They told me this. Are you hearing kind of the same thing? And then we'll actually request information from the county or from, other services for the actual information. And it's processed. Sometimes it takes longer than others, but I really believe in telling our viewers the truth and being as unbiased as possible and getting both sides of a story, even if I'm not in complete agreement with the other side at times, but they deserve to get their point across if they have one.
Kind of working hard to make sure information's credible, that it's genuine, that it's accurate. What is that information, that building sources, maybe doing some background research look like for you when you're involved in a story like that?
It depends what the story is. If it's an investigative piece, it's going to take a little longer. Mm-hmm. I'm going to try to get more sources and more accurate data for it. If it's, a trial, I do a lot of checking up of the court, the court page, it's public record. And I think a lot of people realize that it's public record. I go every morning and I check the dockets for every court.
Do you?
Every court, every morning.
Yeah, that kind of explains. Every now and then I have lawyers that are in the courtroom and they'll go, how'd the media find out? And I'll say, I don't know.
Everybody laughs at my system because I have a very organized calendar.
Yeah.
Of every court has its own page with its own calendar and its own cases. But that's how I stay organized. There's so many cases in Bexar County, I'd lose track.
Yeah.
So that's my way. I check the dockets every morning. If it's a felony 1 offense, I'm checking it. I'm seeing where it's at. If it hasn't been indicted, I'm checking how long has it not been indicted, why it hasn't not been indicted yet, and where are we at in that backlog. It's constant.
So I'm getting the sense that there's a lot more that goes into developing and knowing where a story could be than actually making the story.
Yeah, and it took a while to build up to that. When Paul announced he was going to retire and I kind of got the sense that I was going to take over, I immediately started building my database. Uh-huh. And it was still a good 6 months before his last day. Uh-huh. I immediately started asking questions about cases. Even though we were in the middle of the pandemic, a lot of things were on hold, but there was still crime happening. There was still, hearings that were kind of happening, maybe not so much trials, but cases were still getting kind of checked on in certain areas. So I kept track and I started just building out my list to where I have it now. And it's, like I said, people laugh at my organization at the station. I go, This is the only way I can keep track. There's hundreds of cases dating back, so I don't know how long, but we got to keep track of them. People are going to ask, hey, what happened to that case? Or what happened to this case? Or whatever happened to that guy? And I actually take a little pride in knowing that as for KSAT, we're on top of it as far as making sure we go back and covering those cases that get forgotten about.
There's so much background information, and I am amazed at how quickly I'll see some story pop up. And now I don't look at it in real time generally because I'm in court, but after the fact, I'll get some pop up on a social media website, and I'll see that at a particular point in time, you put something out through a reporting type segment, the reporting piece, and I'm thinking, how did you get that out there so quick? To me, it seems like you got tight deadlines.
Especially with the high profile cases, if I know a big thing is coming, I will have something already pre-prepared. And I have a really good team back at the station who knows what's going on, knows something's coming up. We've talked about it the day before. We've planned for it. And we have our court live stream team that we all chat on. So I'm chatting with them while things are going on in court. So once that, decision is made, or once something has been brought down or something happens, I've messaged them. They go to my article that's already been pre-written and fill in the blanks for me.
So it's a good
and then they push it out.
Yeah. All right. And with that thought, let's do a quick Q&A break. What's coming up next? We'll be right back.
This is Q&A with Judge Ron Rangel. Submit your question today at beyondthegavelpodcast.com.
Welcome to the Q&A break. We have a question from one of our listeners. Why aren't cameras allowed in certain courts like federal court? It's a good question. Erica, I'll let you answer that one.
I was like, I wish they would allow cameras in federal court. It's very difficult to tell a story especially a TV news story without a camera. It's kind of just the law of, federal courts. It's not just a Texas thing or a San Antonio. It's like that throughout the entire country.
Open courts, right?
Yes, open courts.
Anybody could go in and watch. So on the state court side, every judge is different. Judges have complete control over the courtroom in terms of the demeanor and maintaining everything that relates to that. And so in the 379th, and I think most judges kind of do what I do. In the 379th, what we do is we allow the media to come in with cameras. We allow the media to record. And that's because, first of all, we're providing information to the public. We're educating the community as to what's happening within that courtroom, but also because those of you that are in the media that come into the courtroom have an understanding as to the rules. Things like don't show anybody who's on the jury.
Yep.
That's pretty important, right? Things like if there's a child that's testifying, don't show them or their face, or list their names. Be careful with certain terminology that's used, right? So you guys understand the rules that each judges have, and I'm sure every judge has their own set of rules. But we don't allow people from the general public to come in and record because they don't understand those rules. And once certain things are out in the sphere, the technology and everything that relates to that, then once something is put online, it spreads like wildfire, and we don't want anything like that to come back at any time. So we want to make sure that the courtroom is still integral in terms of what it is that is being shown. Has that kind of been your experience?
Yeah, it's definitely been my experience, especially when a new judge comes in after an election. I try to go and introduce myself to them. I ask them, what are your rules? What can I not do? What can I do? Do you allow live stream? Do you not allow live stream? And just showing them my face. You're going to see me. Even if you don't allow my camera, you're still going to see me. Mm-hmm. So I think it's very important. And I think some other counties are definitely missing out and educating their public about what goes on in the courtroom. I don't know how many times I get, stopped in the hallways here. Oh, thank you for, explaining to us what jury duty is like or what that process looks like. If you don't do that, people don't know, and you're going to end up having a lot of residents in your courthouse with unanswered questions and just lost. And not everybody always gets it right. I know there's been some other journalists that come into courtrooms and have made some of those mistakes. And I've
seen that. Yeah.
And I've always told them too, colleagues from other places, like, I'll try my best to be like, hey, these are the rules. Don't show the jury. There's a child going up to the stand, like you said, or the judge doesn't allow this, or my cameraman was like, they want your mic to be over there, where to place things at in the courtroom, because not all the stations here cover courts daily like we do at KSAT. So, I try my best to try to be friendly, and as long as they're respectful and helping colleagues from other places out, because if they get in trouble, then it could ruin it for all of us.
It's a good perspective. Thank you for sending in those questions. Keep them coming. You can text Beyond the Gavel anytime or reach out through our website at beyondthegavelpodcast.com. We appreciate the input. Let's head back to our conversation.
This is Q&A with Judge Ron Rangel. Submit your question today at beyondthegavelpodcast.com.
Welcome back to the show. I'm here with Erica. Let's just jump right back in where we left off. How many folks are involved? We're talking about a team. What are we talking about?
It depends on the day. So, sometimes people go on vacation. So if I have my core team, especially for a live stream trial, especially for a first day of a high profile trial, it's me, it's my cameraman, Messiel. And then I have a web writer, and I have my live stream producer, and then maybe one other person who's helping if I need extra help for the day.
Wow.
A lot of it is just pre-planning, just knowing ahead of time. And I've done it long enough where I kind of have an idea what could happen, what might not happen, how long it might take. And so everybody's just kind of waiting for my word. And usually if you see me typing in the courtroom, I'm sending the messages. And a lot of it is already kind of pre-written, where they just got to go in and fill the blanks for me.
That's where your experience is important.
Yes, for sure.
Absolutely.
At first, I would say 4 years ago, when we covered Otis McCain, the first live stream trial, to how we cover a live stream trial now, we've learned a lot.
Yes, I can imagine. So the Otis McCain, that was a death penalty trial for those that are not familiar with it. That was the first live stream trial in Bexar County.
Yes, it was.
I was the presiding judge on that. The jury ended up sentencing him to death. That case is still going through the appellate process, the writ process. That's going to be a long time in coming as it relates to how long that case is on our radar. I'm still dealing with that pretty regularly. See, we're talking about your experience. You've been doing it for a long time. You are a fixture, definitely a fixture. I think. Well, I know everybody in the courthouse knows who you are. I'm sure tons of people in the community know who you are. You've seen a lot of strange situations in the courtroom. What would come to mind as being maybe possibly the strangest case? I know you get asked these kind of questions all the time. I do. So I know you do too.
The strangest case.
Weirdest situation that you've come across.
I think obviously, we were just talking Otis McCain, the way that ended after, the verdict came in and he elbowed one of your bailiffs. I think we kind of saw it coming. I didn't. My photographer did, because he zoomed in on him, and I wasn't expecting it. I don't think anybody was. But it was very high intense. And we were live in the 6 o'clock news during when that happened. So I just remember, because I had my earpiece in from the producer yelling at me to run outside to go live. And I'm like, but wait, there's still things going on in here. They're like, go outside. That was definitely an interesting case. I mean, gosh, there's been cases like the Andre McDonald case. I know you had an episode.
Yes. Yes. John Hunter. I interviewed him a few episodes back. That
was interesting in the fact that I thought I was so sure he was going to get a guilty verdict. And it came back not guilty on murder. And my mouth dropped, because I remember him sitting on the stand kind of with a smirk on his face, talking about how he killed his wife. And it was just so shocking. From the point that this incident happened until this case went to trial, he had not spoken one word. And then he got on the stand, and this was just shocking. And I remember our live stream numbers went through the roof, because he was from Jamaica. So we had a really international audience watching this case.
Wow.
And I think there's one point where you could see me, in the back in the gallery from one of the live stream shots, and I think my mouth is literally like what's going on? Is he really saying this?
Yeah.
And then they found him not guilty of the murder charge. It was just baffling to me. And I've had conversations with John Hunter about it. And he's like, it's the law, and the law. He's really, John, he's very all about the law and how he interprets the law. And it was just, that was definitely one I will never forget. And we still talk about it at the station.
So folks know that haven't heard the John Hunter interview, and folks should listen to it. It is one of our more popular ones. He was found guilty of manslaughter. Of manslaughter, yes. And he actually admitted on the stand, from what I understand.
Yes.
He actually was the cause of her death. And then with the Otis McCain trial, I don't think we've talked about this on this podcast, so that's still pending in terms of the appeal. So all I can discuss is what is on the record, without giving my opinions on it because of the appellate process. But after he was found guilty, the moment that he was found guilty, video indicates your video, and it may have been your video that actually was brought in and played in court. He started to immediately take off his shirt, and as the bailiffs were taking him to the back, he elbows one of the bailiffs, a deputy that works with me, Sid, in the head. And so then that was a pretty dramatic takedown.
Oh, yeah, it was very dramatic. I feel like every investigator and deputy in the building ended up in that courtroom so fast.
All caught on your live stream.
Yeah, and we were live in the 6 o'clock news with it.
Yeah, so that happened right at 6?
So the verdict, I think we had just missed the verdict, like by a few minutes, but we were obviously still showing the live stream, and I could hear Steve Spriester, our anchors, and Myra Arthur in my ear talking, and then obviously the elbow happens, and I just hear Steve's like, no, he just hit a bailiff. And he's, Steve's getting, very loud on air, and obviously it was loud in the courtroom. And then I just hear producer yelling in my ear, get outside to the live shot. So it was definitely, was good TV though. It was a good newscast.
I was fortunate to have been a part of that. So we're talking about your job and it's very interesting job that you do, because it is such a public type job. What are like some of the best parts of what you do? When people ask you, and I'm sure you speak to groups about what you do, what do you look back and say, God, I love this part of my work?
I think meeting the community.
Yeah.
I think just when somebody comes up to you and says thank you, especially when I've done a story that involves, a family where their, loved one was killed, and they were, I covered the case, and they've come to me afterwards saying thank you for giving them a voice when they're no longer here.
Providing them a voice.
And that has been very rewarding for me, knowing that I could do that. And that they respected. Obviously, there's an other end to that where some people are not happy with some of the things I have to say. I always try to give people the benefit of the doubt, whatever side they're on. If you want to talk, I'll listen. I will give you, a microphone as long as you don't cuss at me and respect me. I will, and I do. Usually at the end of a trial, not many people know this because sometimes they always say no, but I will give a defendant. I will send a request wherever prison they get sent out. If it's a high-profile case or big enough case, saying, hey, I covered your trial. Would you like, you didn't get to speak or you didn't get to take the stand. Would you like to do an interview post your trial? They're not always granted. They don't always say. I could tell you that not more than a handful have yes. And then sometimes they'll say yes, and then they'll back out at the last minute. Yeah. So I always give both sides, or I try my best to give both sides the opportunity to say that I gave them a fair story.
It's kind of our business, though, right? You give a fair story, you do a good job. Some people are going to be upset with that.
It comes with the job.
Yeah.
You can't make everybody happy. Somebody's always going to be upset. I actually had a case not too long ago. I don't even think it was this year, maybe the end of last year, where a gentleman was on trial and he was kind of upset that we were covering the trial. He asked me before, he's like, hey, what can I get for you not to cover my trial? I'm a good person. This is self-defense. I didn't do it. I don't want this to ruin my life. And I go, well, it's an open court. I'm going to cover it, but I promise you I'm going to be fair. He ended up getting found not guilty because of self-defense. And I actually ran into him in an elevator that same day, and he thanked me. He's like, you were very fair in your story, and I want to say thank you.
Right.
And that made me feel good because, I could have been like, this guy did it. He's a horrible person. He was charged with murder. He had to have been. But no, I mean, there's both sides to a story. Like you see a trial, you have to give both sides the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
And that's what I kind of have to do with my stories too, whether people like it or not. But that is what it is. And I always like when people are like, you got the facts wrong. I go, I just reported what the testimony said for the day. I don't know what facts you're talking about. Literally, that's what they said on the record.
Right.
That's my story. And so I was like, this is not some big piece, investigative piece. This is what is said on the stand, what is said in open court. You could come sit down with me if you want and hear the whole thing. Obviously, I'm shortening it, but that was actually really interesting when that defendant, I got met up with him afterwards, and he was like, you were actually really fair. Thank you.
I'm sure you get a lot of that, right? We're dealing with so much emotion
Yes.
with the types of work that we do. People that have been through tremendous tragedy, right? Indescribable tragedy. And I'm sure that they bring that emotion with them, and we have to deal with that.
I have emotion. I mean, there's been some trials that have been extremely difficult to sit through.
Mm-hmm.
And I think once I became a mother, it got harder.
Mm-hmm.
There's been times where I've had to walk out of a courtroom because it's been too hard to look at autopsy photos. Or it's, been too hard to see a mother crying during a victim impact statement. You feel for them. I don't know how y'all sometimes sit on the stand and try to poker face it, because if you'll see me sometimes in the corner, I'm a big blubbering mess. I am crying. I'm like, I'll put my head down, and Miss Sael will kind of tap me. He's like, do you need to walk out? I'm like, no, I'll be okay. But,
Yeah.
you get emotional too. It's very hard to hear somebody with so much emotion and so much loss in their life, and then having to put that in display in front of people they don't know.
We're dealing with human misery.
Exactly.
I've seen you in the back of the courtroom. I don't think you've ever been a big blubbering mess, but, I know we deal with, there have been some trials, and I can't say currently why, because of my ethics or which trials they were, but there have been some trials that have really impacted me hard. And in my role, I never want to show any expression whatsoever, because I don't want to in any way influence the jury and what it is that they're thinking. And so I'm sure you could go through the exact same experience when you're reporting, right? So let's say you go through that experience as you describe it, which helps, which puts you in a mind frame where you feel like a big blubbering mess. But then a few minutes later, you got to get in front of that camera. What's that like?
I think it depends on the case. Sometimes I've been told, especially, from management, who obviously checks up on us constantly. Hey, are you guys good? Do you need a mental health break? Like, it can get hard. But I have shown my emotion on air before, because I think that's part of the story too. Because there was a case once where it was a child death case, and I walked out crying because it was very difficult to sit there and see autopsy photos of this child. But
those are hard.
I soon realized after, about 10 minutes later, judge gave the entire courtroom a break because the entire jury broke down crying seeing those same photos. So that becomes part of the story. I never try to put myself in the story, ever. Sometimes I'll leave myself out completely if it's just too much. But in that case, it was to show that, look, this is a very difficult case. Everybody in that gallery, myself included, the jury included, were in tears because these photos of the abuse this child endured were so horrific. It's to give the viewer an idea of what is going on at the moment. And it doesn't happen all the time, but I think maybe it's only happened for me once or twice where I've had to do that. There was another situation, was another case that was really, I think it was autopsy photos again, and a juror passed out.
Yeah.
That's the story. These are hard things that somebody who is getting thrust out of their everyday life, that doesn't see stuff like this on a daily basis, is having to sit there and see and hear. And it's very hard. And I want our viewers to understand, yes, it is part of our civic duty, and it's hard sometimes to be a juror, but I want them to know this is what comes with it as well.
In the courthouse, different rules apply. We have rules of ethics, and got to make sure that we handle things certain ways. Just to educate the public, what type of ethical rules apply for somebody that does your kind of work?
I think it makes a difference on the person and on the station. For us, and for myself and for KSAT, we always, as far as ethics, there's just different things. We obviously we want to get it on air, but we want to be accurate. So we don't care if we're last. And it's actually benefited us that we've held back on some things because it ended up being wrong when the other stations have been wrong and gotten it out first.
Right.
So
because the initial information was
yeah, it was not, we waited because we were like, maybe we should get confirmation for one more person.
Right.
Like, or are you sure that source is, legit? Maybe we should get 2 or 3 more sources. Just makes us feel better.
It's like a sense, a feeling that you
get. It just makes, let's just hold off.
Right.
Another thing is, obviously getting both sides of the story. We have a policy during election season. Even if you're, say, the sheriff and you're running for office and the sheriff has a press conference on something, by our standards, we still have to go ask his opponent what their opinion is.
Right.
So a lot of times during election season, we try to stay away from those who are running for office, because then that means, we've got to call all these other people and ask them how they feel about it. And we have to say that we reached out to their opponent. That's another kind of one of our ethical policies. Day to day, we just kind of just morally, just what's right, There's a lot of strange things going on right now in our country. And there's maybe days I don't like what I'm doing,
right,
but I still have to do it. And I still have to do my job, even if I don't want to do that story or I'm not in favor of that story. One day I didn't have a court case and, the governor and the lieutenant governor at the Alamo signing a law about expanding gun rights. As soon as I walked in, his, people that were there started yelling at us. That was very difficult to have to still stand there and be yelled at and then still tell a story about the governor signing this bill.
In an unbiased
way when I've been yelled at by numerous people for no reason at all, but just being part of the media.
Well, nationally and statewide too. I'm not sure about locally, but certainly nationally. Media's been under attack quite a bit, right?
Oh, yeah.
And there's reasons for it, and all of us have different opinions as to why and all of that. And then we've seen those attacks ratchet up. They've been increasing. What's that like for you, having to...
It's scary some days, We've had some of our reporters get shot at.
I've heard of stuff.
Yeah. Our cameras will get pushed, and that's equipment's not cheap. It's expensive. We've had, some of our units been hit or marked or tagged. That's why a lot of us now are unmarked units. It's another one of our policies, and a lot of news stations have gone to a MMJ, what's called an MMJ role, where the reporter is their own photog, their own editor. They're shooting everything themselves.
I've seen that, yeah.
We still have a policy at KSAT where we're not going to do that because of safety reasons. Because my photographer is my eyes. Like, I'm focused on the camera and doing my report. He's looking at what's around me. I've had people come behind me. I was at an event once where this man tried to give me a hug in the middle. And he's like, they're warning you, or they'll try to push them aside. And, I feel for those, especially those women reporters who are having to do it all themselves. Because I think once a day they make me do it by myself, I'm being like, all right, I'm done. I'm going to go do something else because my safety comes first. And I appreciate that we have that policy right now where the safety issue is just a big thing. And I mean, even now, we may just be in a courtroom, but walking out, I've had to have bailiffs walk me out before because family has threatened us. I ask, hey guys, can you allow me to our vehicle? I'm not too sure how these, they weren't happy with, us being here.
I can imagine.
And they've, every time I've asked, the bailiffs have always been great here at the courthouse and friendly and protected us as well and helped us out if we had security issues.
I think we got a really good courthouse community here.
We really do. It's kind of, I was nervous. I was very overwhelmed when I came here at first. I was just like, oh my God, there's so many courtrooms. There's so many cases. There's so many people, Every courtroom has its different prosecutors. And then there's all the defense attorneys. Some are nice, some are not nice. I was in Paul, so they were just like, don't talk to me.
Every judge is different.
Every judge has their own rules and different things to do and not to do. So it took a while. But I will say everybody, especially the judges and the court staff, were very friendly with us. And I think Paul laid a great foundation for me coming in, where even though I was a little overwhelmed, it was still like I could go up to you, or I could go up to another judge, help, like what do I need to do, or what can I do or not do? And you guys have been really great in helping us. Not every county is as media friendly. In Harris County, I've heard the rules are you can have a camera but no audio. And then in other counties, there's no cameras at all. So I think we're very, very fortunate here in Bexar County, where not only is my camera allowed, but we're getting the access that we're getting. I'm getting to live stream, and depending on the judge, sometimes, during the break, I can shoot my story inside the courtroom when it's empty. Not every place is that open, and that's been a really big help, and I can never thank you guys enough for allowing me that access.
That's good to hear, and I think that access to the media is a big, important thing that we need to do within the justice system. I think the more folks try to hide things, then the more negative feelings that people get about what they perceive as maybe some sort of injustice or some sort of hiding going on in the courthouse. And I think we need to go out of our way to avoid that. Other jurisdictions are the same way when it comes to the courthouse presence, right? Like I hear other jurisdictions, for example, Harris County maybe, where the state and the defense are not very friendly with each other, and it causes a lot of issues, and then the judges then have a tendency to sort of respond to that in a way that is not helpful. And so you have an entire system that is not really geared at moving things along, whatever the end result is, whatever the facts require in that case. You mentioned earlier about a demographic that KSAT had generally had, I guess, historically an older type of demographic.
It's shifted that way.
Yeah. So
it's shifted that way. So I remember starting 15 years ago, our demographic, we could still get a younger 20-year-old to watch the news. Now it's literally millennial age and up.
Is that because of technology?
That's definitely because, and most people you go to and ask, they don't watch local news. It's almost, but yet they go to us right away when something big is happening locally. Because obviously, weather-wise, when the pandemic was happening, there was constant updates of what was going on here in the county, and our numbers went up. Then they went really, back down. We're, still doing okay. Where the, KSAT is still the number one station in the city, but everybody has been hit hard. Because a lot of the newer, younger generation just don't watch the news anymore. And not just that because they don't watch it, they just have so many more options, and you have your phone now, everybody's, just, let me just scroll through and see what's going on TikTok or on Facebook, and maybe I'll pick a local app to check the weather. But other than that, I don't, most people I talk to, or I'll be like, hey, do you watch local news? They're like, I don't know what's going on.
Attention spans are shorter.
A lot.
And that's interesting, too, because, I pay attention to both national and local news, but it seems like local news just touches us so much more. There's so much more that affects us locally that we would want to know what's happening. On the national scene, it all kind of tends to sound the same after a while, to me. I don't know how other folks look at it. What does the future look like? Right? We know that technology is changing things. We know that the demographics are changing. What does it look like for a local TV station that is producing information to the public about what's happening in the courtrooms?
It's changing. We hope it doesn't go away. We just have to change with it. It's changing at a faster pace. Like I said, live streaming is where we've been putting a lot of focus on right now. Everything gets live streamed, from press conferences to trials, our newscasts. Even when we're off air, we're still kind of doing news on the live stream. We're trying to give our viewers more options with everybody else. And we're trying to make sure they know about those options. We're constantly pushing, like, hey, don't forget, and not just on air, but on Instagram, on social media platforms, anywhere anybody could see something. We're going to try to be. Recently, I found out we were on Nextdoor app. I was like, we're on Nextdoor? I didn't even know that. I thought that was just for neighborhood, chat. Oh, well, no, you could put things, if there's a certain neighborhood, you could focus it on that neighborhood if it's going on in there. And we could kind of like make sure our article hits that neighborhood if there's something going on in that neighborhood.
Right.
it's just, we're just finding different ways. LinkedIn is another one. Like I said, if another social media app comes out, I'm throwing my phone out the window.
Constantly.
But it's constantly changing. It's only a matter of time before something else comes out, and we just have to keep up with it. And we're trying our best to think ahead and making sure we're ready. It has gone down with, a lot of people cutting the cord and changing how they watch the news. We're just reminding them we're still here.
So is that kind of what's happening with newspapers, with print media? Is it that they're not able to adapt quite as quickly? Because I hear that tends to be something that has been hit a little harder by technological changes.
I don't think they were prepared themselves for how quick it was going to happen. Mm-hmm. And obviously they're dealing with that struggle now. I'm a news junkie, so I see it all. I check the Express News, but I don't check the print version. I go online. Even that's a little different. Before my parents, we'd had the paper thrown in our front yard every morning. My dad had the paper every morning. I don't get the paper. I should subscribe as a news person, but I subscribe to the online version, which I'm still giving back. But there's other avenues. I'm always trying to see what everybody else is doing. Mm-hmm. That's how I stay on my toes too, and I don't fall behind, is seeing what everybody else is doing. And I just think for print journalism, it's sad because there's some great print journalists out there, and they're still out there doing fabulous work, great work. I wish they got more attention that they needed. I hope they can catch up, and it doesn't go away. But like us, they're still there. They're still there.
We can't force society to focus on certain things if they're not going in that direction. And it is hard for me to think about the direction that news has been affected, which is as a result of these types of changes. Let's say you step into a courtroom, you got a day, and I know this has been my experience with you, especially lately. It seems like courts have a tendency to put a bunch of big cases all at once. And so you walk in, and I've seen this within the last month. We had the kind of case that the media kind of talked a little bit about, and people were paying attention. And I know people out in the public were coming up to me and saying, "Man, I know you're on this case that's going on right now, but there were a bunch of other really big, high-profile cases going on at the same time." How do you decide which one to report on, which one to sit in on, which one to let the public know about what's going on a day-to-day when you have multiple big types of trials going on at the same time? You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, because we're going through it right now. There's 3 murder trials going on right now.
Yeah.
And I'm like, where do I go? Where do I start? I research everyone, especially when the actual incident happened. Uh-huh. And I look and talk with our managers about, okay, what was our viewer engagement at that time for this case? Do they want to know, what happens? Obviously, I'm going to touch a little bit on all of them, or at least they'll be mentioned on the website, and, that, hey, it's happening, or they're in trial. But the one we focus on is definitely the one that's either higher profile, a bigger charge, or affected the community more. So there's a couple different things we look at. Right now, the 3 cases that are going on, one of them is a capital murder. Multiple people were killed. So that was the one that was we focused on, where the other 2 were as important. People were killed, but they were more domestic violence incidents that only affected a smaller amount of people, whereas the capital murder was a large amount of people involved.
Right. More people being touched. Oh, that makes sense. But it's always a judgment call, right?
It is a judgment call. And sometimes if one day there's that day we're like, oh, there's that forensic guy again. Let me just go down to the other courtroom and see where they're at, and I'll kind of switch gears. But I'm always checking in. I'm always saying, hey, where y'all at? Are y'all close to closing? Is there something big that you expect today? I'm always checking in with the coordinators and everybody on the staff.
I can always attest to that. Checking in. You ever worry about your coverage and maybe how it could shape public perception, maybe some sort of end result that results as a product of your reporting and your work?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's always it has to be at the top of your mind. Mm-hmm. There's such a big responsibility with words.
Right.
And obviously I don't want to be wrong. I'll always say I'll try to be the first to fix that mistake. Mm-hmm. Or I'll call and be like, hey guys, I got this wrong. I'm sorry. I'm going to put an editor's note at the top of the website with my change. We got to put a correction out. It happens. I'm not perfect, especially when I'm juggling, hundreds of cases a week, checking in on them. Yeah, it's always at the back of my mind, wanting to make sure I'm accurate. But there are times we make mistakes, and I try my best not to. And I'll apologize, and I'll say, I hope this didn't ruin things, as far as communications between us. But I will do my best to fix it. And usually, if I fix it pretty quickly, most people let it go.
And honestly, I've seen KSAT actually remove video.
Yeah.
And that was impressive to me. I first came in, and so I got elected in 2008. I started January 1st, 2009 on the job, and within a few months, certainly within the year, a year had not passed. It was in 2009. There was a story that the local newspaper had done, and it was related to court-appointed attorneys and judges, and what judges give court-appointed lawyers more work than others. And I opened up the newspaper. I was a brand new judge. I opened up the newspaper, and I saw my name at the top of it. I'm like, what the heck? And what they did, there was a reporter. He's no longer with that paper, but he had reported, rather than say this court gave this number of appointments and this much money to this lawyer, he wrote it in a way to where he actually put my name in there. And when I communicated with the paper, I said, hey, I just got elected, right? This is a 3-year study. Pretty much most of this time happened before I even got into office. So you're not really talking about me. You're talking about a previous person. And they put a little asterisk on that said, this time period encompasses 2 separate judges because, Ron Rangel came in January the 1st of this year, and this is a 3-year study. But in my mind, I would think on the electronic version, they could just remove the paragraph or change the language and just refer to the court and not to the judge's name. Back then, I felt like they put the judge's name for more emphasis,
yeah.
Right? For more, make it a little more salacious.
And there's been mistakes we've made on the website on that. I know we will change.
Then y'all do. We
do change, but we add that editor's note hey, you'll notice a change. Earlier it said this, but we moved after, further discussion and it was corrected. We've had removed video. We've done things after someone has, were charged for something and later got, exonerated or whatever. They've called and asked us to remove things. And as long as they have that order that says they were exonerated, we'll remove it.
It's all part of that.
And we want our viewers to trust what we're doing. And especially in a time where we're getting questioned about everything that we do.
Well, kudos on that, because I've seen it. Kudos to KSAT. I've definitely seen that. So I know it's difficult. We've been talking a little bit, and this is something I still think is interesting to me. What is that like to take such complicated legal jargon, these concepts in the courtroom, and reduce it down in a way that the public can understand such nuance, things like plea bargains or things like mistrials? I see sometimes things are written about, let's say, a plea bargain, and then the community will respond through little comments, and you could tell that there's a lack of understanding. Yeah. And it's not on the reporter's fault, obviously. People it's a difficult field. We're dealing with difficult nuances. What is it like to try to distill these things in a way that is educating?
I try in everything we do. Mm-hmm. In the web article especially, because that's what people are reading. If it says dismissal, I'll put, he's free to go.
Right.
I'll may still put the word, but I'll try to also be after, this dismissal, he was let out of jail and he's free to live his life the way he is. I'm always, even in the newscast, we heard this term, this is what it means. If I don't understand it, I've got to figure out a way to make our viewers understand it. And even then, even process it down even further, like Paul said, the Sesame Street version. I think it's important, though. I think educating our public about those words, because, like I said, sometimes I've come into these courtrooms and people look so. Mm-hmm. I've spoken to families of victims who are lost and not being explained, or being explained, but still not being explained in their terms and understanding of what's going on. I recently had a mother of a victim email me because they didn't understand how somebody who was sentenced could be up for parole so quickly when they thought half the term, where did the math wasn't adding. Even for me, it wasn't adding. I had to go ask, other people to figure out the answer for her. It's constantly just educating the public that these legal words, they're scary at times, but we could figure it out together.
Well, let's shift it a little bit. I know outside the newsroom, you have a podcast. I mentioned it in the introduction. It's called Texas Crime Stories. You're the co-host. What inspired that? What is it that got you to have that particular podcast? What is it that you want listeners to take away from it as they go through that?
So we're on a little pause because my other co-host, Lee Waldman, last year left to go be a correspondent at CNN.
Oh, nice.
So we're on a little pause right now, but my mom is a big factor in this. I have just loved watching true crime shows. I remember watching 2020 growing up about these cases, and it's always been like a big puzzle. I want to try to figure out who did it before it ends. And then later, now it's saturated, but like shows like Snapped and other true crime shows that have come out and podcasts that have come out, it sounds so bad to say fascinated with it. I don't know if I'm fascinated. Obviously, they're horrible stories, but figuring out the details and the puzzle and trying to be, I almost say I was probably a detective in my past life. Because I don't think I could have been a lawyer because I cry about everything and I'd probably get quiet if somebody yelled at me. But I think it's just, my mom has always watched the shows, so they were always on and I watched. And then covering courts, you kind of get to, when a crime happens here, we only get certain details.
Right.
They're only allowed to release certain details to the media and to the public. But when you sit in that courtroom and hear the trial, you hear everything from start to beginning, even before the start of how this case is what it is. And that always was fascinating to me. So with Texas Crime Stories, it was putting some of those bigger cases back in the spotlight, or especially some that were unsolved, to see if we could get any type of traction back and having conversations about these cases that really impacted our community. Obviously, we've had a lot of big high-profile cases here through the years, from Janine Jones, who was known as the killer nurse, the medical center rapist, who you've done a podcast about as well. There's just
Janine Jones.
You did Janine Jones. Okay, yes. I have to go back and hear that one. There's been so many high-profile cases that impacted our community, and people want to know what's happening.
So the podcasting, to me, it's an extension of what you do. Then, right? You're giving voice to the victims, or those that maybe feel like they need a voice. You're still educating. You're still talking about crime stories. Yeah, just a different format.
A different format, and a lot more expanded.
Yeah.
Not my 1 minute and a half on the newscast.
You got the ability to talk
a little bit more. And Lee and I really, talked about these cases and tried to also, talk through what happened at a level that our viewers and listeners would understand as well. There was unsolved cases, that were just, we were just hoping that maybe one person will come back and say, hey, and then we'll have some of the reporters that actually cover those cases in depth join us to talk a little bit about what they experienced out in the field, covering these stories day to day when they happened and talking to those involved.
Well, Erica, I've really enjoyed this conversation with you.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I've been trying to get you on for a long time.
I know, with scheduling and, I'm in a trial, or you're in a trial, or my kid has softball.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on, but I'm glad we got to finally do this.
I appreciate you coming in. I know you are very busy. And so the time that you spent with us today, helping our listeners understand your perspective, is valuable. It is for me. I actually learned quite a bit today in talking to you. Any last words that you have for our listeners?
You're going to have to come to KSAT and be on our podcast now.
Anytime. I've been on
different
several.
Perspective. There you go.
I've been on several of the local news media's podcasts, in different arenas, different topics, different reasons. I don't know if I've ever done. I know you did a Facebook interview with me.
Yeah, we've done a few. We've done a few things like that. But yeah, we'll definitely have to get you back. I always appreciate just not just yourself, but all the judges here, for the most part, extremely media friendly. And I can never thank them enough for allowing us to be in their courtrooms. And we hope we always, do well by them.
There was a former judge, and he used to always tell me, Ron, be careful with the media, right? It's that pet alligator, at some point it'll bite you. But the way I look at it,
we're not that scary.
No, yeah, as long as you're always open, as long as you're honest, as long as you speak, what the truth and explain things, it's like there's really nothing to fear, I think, right? Just be honest.
Yeah, just be honest, and it goes a long way. And being respectful of one another. I like I said before, I never go into a courtroom without asking, or just being like, "Hey, are y'all okay with this? We're still good?"
Yes, it all makes sense. Well, thanks again for being here. We've reached the end of this episode. Big thanks to Erica Hernandez for joining us, and to you, the listeners, thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe, drop us a question at any time, keep the conversation going between our episodes. You can always reach out by sending in your questions and thoughts through our website or by texting the show in the description box. Thanks for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks.
You've been listening to Beyond the Gavel with Judge Ron Rangel. Join us in the next 2 weeks where we are educating the public and expanding mindsets. Head to our website, beyondthegavelpodcast.com, or your favorite podcast platform to subscribe to the latest episodes and updates.